Hello everyone, my name is Anna and I welcome you to this new video on this channel, Jóvenes Peregrinando. In today's video, we are going to be studying and analyzing chapters 12, 13, and 14 of Genesis. Today's video is titled Abraham, Faith and the Promises of the Creator, Part 1. We are going to start studying the life of a man that the Eternal called with a special purpose and different from other patriarchs that we have seen throughout history, from Adam to Noah and Shem to Abram, or known as Abraham. We can see this man is called Abraham. He is known as Abraham. And this man comes from the offspring of Shem. He was in Haran when the Eternal called him and told him to leave his land and to also leave his relatives. What we are going to see in these 3 chapters is about the characteristics and the history of this man, and this is going to help us so that as believers we are capable of knowing what are the characteristics that the Eternal looks for in every human being, in every person, in order to be called to his kingdom, so that he says, I've seen you, I'm going to call you, and I'm going to pact with you. The promises that the Eternal gives to Abram now catch up with us these days. If we obey like Abram, if we get away from idolatry, from any kind of idolatry, and if we have a heart to look for the real Elohim. And we'll starting off with verse 1 of chapter 12 of Genesis, it says, And Adonai said to Abram, Get out of your country and from your kindred and from your father's house into the land that I will show you. We can see here that the Eternal tells Abram to get out of his father's house, but what the Eternal here is trying to say is to go to get away from, or to get away from everything he had seen and learned or practiced, the type of attitude he had in that house, to let all of that go away. And the Eternal asks him not only to leave physically, but also to leave spiritually, to leave everything, to go in search of something superior than what the Eternal was going to give him. In chapter 2, in verse 2, it says, And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Right here we can see that the Eternal gives Abram a promise and tells him that he will make out of him a great nation. This great nation was Israel in its time and prophetic space. But we also see how in the promises that he tells him that he will magnify his name. And here we see, the opposite of Nimrod, who looked for the recognition of the people, of the man. And he was not like Abraham, who didn't look for it, who didn't seek for it, but the Eternal gave it to him because of the obedience that lived in him, that he had inside him. In verse 3 it says, And I will bless those that bless you, and curse the one who curses you. And in you shall all families of the earth be blessed. In this verse is used in a very superficial way, because many sometimes take this only for a geopolitical nation, and that the blessing is material and physical. But what we read is very different from what it's said, because if something is recognized in Abram, it is his spirituality and obedience. So if we copy his legacy and want to be like Abram and seek the Eternal with all our heart, this blessing is also fulfilled, And through Abram and his example, now also we, the families of the earth, are blessed till this day. Verses 5 through 7 it says, Then Abram departed even as the Eternal had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the people that they had gained in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. And they came into the land of Canaan. These verses are very controversial because we can see in the beginning of this chapter that the Eternal tells Abram to leave his land, to leave his relatives. But it seems that Lot, his nephew, his brother's son, communicates with Abram and goes with him where the Eternal sends him. And we can see here that Abram does not reject his nephew, and that the Eternal allows Lot to go with Abraham or with Abram, not because not only did he have a purpose for Abram, but he also had a purpose for Lot. Here in these verses we see another aspect of Abram, which is good because Abram was a very noble man who had compassion for his nephew, and he shares the call not only with Lot, but he also shares them with the people who joined them, the people who went with them, who followed them. We can see that he also shares the call with them, who will surely these people learned something learned a lot from Abram and from his emunah, his faith. Verse 6 says, And Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem until the oak of Moreh, and the Canaanite was in the land. Right here, when it says the Canaanite was in the land, this means that at that time the Canaanites had already went into a land. They already had taken a land which did not belong to them. In the time of Belek, Noah distributed the land, and this land was the land that belonged to Shem. And this place is nowadays it's known as Arabia, Syria, Israel, Lebanon, and the river of Egypt. The Eternal gives them that land, but as we read, the Canaanites settle there without any authorization. That is why the Eternal tells Abram that he is going to show him a land, and will practically tells him that we are going to recover the land of his inheritance, since Abram was a descendant of Shem, how I had mentioned in the beginning. And we know that this usurpation is still going on till this day, and it will keep on going, and it will not stop until the coming of the Messiah. And well, if you would like to investigate, to learn more or about this topic, then in the channel of Cielos Nuevos y Tierra Nueva, there is this playlist called The Usurper's Return. And I recommend you that playlist. Verse 7 says, And the Eternal appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your seed. And he built an altar there to the Eternal who had appeared to him. In this verse, we can read that it says to Abram, coming well, no, we can see that Abram coming to this land builds a sanctuary, that is an altar, and that the altar that he made alludes to the future century that David, well, it was first David and then Solomon, built to exalt and serve the Almighty. Verse 8 says, and he moved from there to a mountain on the east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel toward the sea and high on the east. And he built an altar there to the Eternal and called upon the name of the Eternal. Once again, we see in these verses the word called. And well, this does not refer precisely to the fact that, Abram called the Eternal, or that he calls the Eternal, since the Eternal had already appeared to him and had revealed his mandates. So what we can understand is that the word called means that he exalted the Eternal. He expressed his service to the Eternal so that the people around him would know and would see that he only serves the Eternal and no one else. Verses 9 through 10 says, And Abram journeyed going on toward the south. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there. For the famine was grievous in the land. According to the tradition, the only reason you could leave the land is because of hunger. And if we look at it from the point of view of the Midrash, hunger can represent the lack of food or spiritual sustenance. So we see how the Eternal is sending a judgment over this Canaanite land, because we can see that when there is famine, it means that it doesn't rain at all, or it doesn't rain, and consequently there is no grass or water for both the seeds and the cattle. And this is the judgment that Canaan passed at this time, during this time. Verses 11 through 14 say, And it came to pass, when he had come near to enter into Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, Behold now, I know that you are a beautiful woman to look upon, and it will be, when the Egyptians see you, they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save you alive. I pray you, say that you are my sister, so that it may be well with me for your sake, and my soul shall live because of you. And it comes to pass that when Abram had come into Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. Here in the scripture, we can see in the scripture that it starts talking about Sarai, and the first thing that is mentioned about her is her beautiness. A unique beauty, because although she was an elderly woman, she was already approximately 65 years old, but her beauty was still notorious. In the Hebrew context, we also understand that her beauty was equally interior in her character and in her capacities as a skillful, intelligent, prudent woman. And because of these characteristics, she had a royalty in her being and Therefore, she was a perfect candidate to be the wife of a pharaoh. Another characteristic about these verses is how Abram supposedly lies about Sarai being his sister, but in reality Abram didn't actually lie, because in reality they were actually siblings, although not from the same mother but from the same father, so they were related. And we can literally read, it shows us that Abram feared of losing his life, since he knew that in those lands that they were going to enter, the men were very unjust and corrupt, because even though adultery was prohibited, but they always found a way to do the bad. So Abram thought that if he said that Sarai was his wife, what these men would do is, they were gonna kill him, and then Sarai was gonna be widowed, and then they were gonna take her as a wife, and that way they were not gonna commit adultery. But we can see that this is not what happens. Later on, we're going to see that this is not what happens, that they do not kill Abraham, that they get to an agreement, and they say to these people that Sarai is not his wife but his sister. Verse 15 through 20 says, "The princess of Pharaoh also saw her and commanded her before Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, and he treated Abram well for her sake. And he had sheep and oxen and male donkeys and male servants and maid servants and female donkeys and camels. And the Eternal plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, 'What is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she is your wife? Why did you say, she is my sister? And so I was about to take her to me as wife. Now therefore, behold your wife. Take her and go your way.' And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away, and his wife, and all that he had." Finally, we see how the Eternal allowed all these events to happen. The Eternal allowed Abram to descend to the land, this land, and that there was hunger, and even that he supposedly lied, although he didn't. And all of this was because all of this was a way of organizing what was going to happen in the future, because as we know, the life of the patriarchs show us the shadows of what was going to happen in the future, or what is going to happen in the future. What we are seeing here is how later Abram's offspring represented in the future of a woman. They represented a woman who were the people of Israel. And they were also going to leave Egypt through plagues, and was going to be taken and held there. But the Eternal tells Egypt to let her go, we can see here that the Eternal tells Egypt to let Sarai go, or to let the people of Israel go, to let them go, and to take everything, and the Egyptians give to the people of Israel, to the people of Israel, in the same way as they did to Abram, all the gold that they had. And we see how the Eternal finally brought Abram and Sarai and the people of Israel out of Egypt with a powerful hand, just the same way that the Eternal brought out the people of Israel, that when the Eternal frees them with a powerful hand. Continuing with chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, it says, "And Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south of Canaan. And Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he went to his journeys from the south, even to Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Hai." Here we can see how Abram is very rich. And well, although Abram was not looking, he was not seeking, his goal was not to become rich. That is, he was not looking to increase treasures. But what we see here is how the Eternal prospers him, because that was his will with Abram. Nowadays, religious people take these verses out of context and preach about the prosperity and say that if the Eternal is with them, then they should be rich in order, to show the blessings, how they're being blessed. But it is not so. It is not like that, because Abram's richness were with a specific will of the Creator to his life, and we cannot compare ourselves with him. Verse 4 says, "To the place of the altar which he had made there at the first, and Abram called on the name of the Eternal there." We can see here that Abram returned to the place where he was in the beginning, and once again he seeks to build an altar to the Almighty and serve and proclaim him, because he was not seeking his own good, but the service of the Almighty, recognizing everything he was doing in his life, that the Eternal was doing in his life, the good that he was doing, and his initiative was to do every time a sanctuary in the place that he was in, that he was in the place that he was stabled. Verses 5 through 10 says, "And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might live together, for their substance was great, so that they could not live together. And there was a strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock, and the Canaanite and the Perizzite lived in the land. And Abram said to Lot, 'Let there be no strife, I pray you, between me and you, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? I pray you, separate yourself from me. If you take the right, I'll take the left. Or if you take the left, I'll take the right. Then I will go. Then I'll go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, and it was all well watered before the Eternal destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Eternal, like the land of Egypt, as you come to Zorah. We can see how the Eternal had greatly prospered both Abram and Lot, so much that their possessions were too many. But the land in which they lived had become too small for these people, um, for them. So Abram made a decision to separate themselves because, well, their shepherds had come to some discussions. Although Abram and Lot didn't come to any discussion, but to avoid those situations, it was better for them to make that decision. And we can see that Abram gives preference to Lot so that he can take the initiative and so he can choose first. He gives Lot that option to choose first. He puts first his nephew. He gives his nephew that opportunity to go first. The scripture tells us that Lot raised his eyes, he lifted his head, he saw that the plain land of the Jordan was very fruitful and decided to go there looking for prosperity in his cattle. And therefore we can read that Abram, he remained in the desert, he stayed with the desert. Verses 11 through 13 says, And Lot chose all the plain of Jordan for himself, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated themselves from one another. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, and Lot lived in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. But the men of Sodom were very wicked and sinners against the Eternal, exceedingly so. We can see here that this means, in these verses, we can see that this means that Lot became great towards Sodom. He took the plain of the land. He took the green part of the land, and the characteristics of the man, in Sodom, the characteristics of these men that lived in Sodom, or in these lands, where they had very characteristics very bad. They were sinful until the Eternal. They did not obey the Eternal. They did not listen to him. But Lot was not aware of this, was not aware of their characteristics, and instead of Lot restraining himself to this way, or to this place, it seemed that he hurried even more, that he rushed himself even more to get there, driven by his desires. Verses 14 through 18 say, And after Lot was separated from him, the Eternal said to Abram, Lift up your eyes now, and from the place where you look, northward and southward, and eastward and westward, for all the land which you see I will give it to you and to your seed forever. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can count the dust of the earth, then shall your seed also be counted, his descendant. Rise up and walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it to you. And Abram moved his tent and came and lived in the oaks of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and he built an altar to the Eternal there. We have read up to now. What we have read up to now is that the Eternal had promised to Abram goods. He promised to him goods. He promised to him prosperity and blessings to his descendants. But he still didn't have any children. He still didn't have the opportunity to have a descendant. But he still, so what we are going to see is how, or is the life, or how the life of this man continues to develop and how he will be fulfilled by the blessings that have been promised. In chapter 14, verses 1 through 18, it talks about the war that happened between Shinar, Elasar, Elam, and the nations who were against Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Bela, Seboim, and Shemember. And while it is understood that the situation was a confrontation between leaderships, and all of them subjected the Canaanite kings, and it is understood that all of these gave tribute to the kings of the east. That is to the Sumerians. And suddenly, they stopped giving tribute to these people, and that is why this war between them comes, because of the rebellion that they had against the other kingdoms, the other kings. In this war, they captured Lot, Abram's nephew, and although Abram was not a conqueror, but his intention was to go and liberate Lot from the kidnapping. That is why when Chedorlaomer went out to meet Abram, he told him to take away everything that he had acquired from Mutin, and to only return the men. But Abram, not wanting the wealth of those profane kingdoms, he only asks this person what his men ate that same day. And this, we see one more characteristic in Abram, which is that he was not greedy, and that he was content, as Paul says, with sustenance and a coat. Verses 18 through 24, we can see that Melchizedek appears, and these verses say, and Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High Elyon, and he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High Elyon, possessor of heavens and earth. And blessed be the Most High Elyon, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him tithes of all. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the people and take the goods for yourself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand to the Eternal, the Most High Elyon, the possessor of heavens and earth, that I will take nothing that is yours, from a thread even to a sandal strap, lest you say, I have made Abram rich. Nothing for me, only that which the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men who went with me, who were Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. This is the first time and the only time we're going to see Melchizedek being mentioned in the biblical story. And it can be said that this character, this person, there are no more records of him until when Paul mentions him in the book of Hebrews, chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. And Paul makes mention of Melchizedek. Melchizedek, sorry, in these verses because he compares him to Yeshua in his priesthood. Since according to Paul, Yeshua is a priest after the order of Melchizedek, this is that he is a priest of Elohim Most High, and at the same time, he is a king. And that is why Yeshua did not have an exclusive Levite priesthood, but his service to Yeshua was complete to that of a king and priest. However, the Hebrew tradition has a concept which they say that Melchizedek and Shem was Shem himself, or else he was at least one of the sons of Shem, and who had been appointed by the eternal Almighty himself as king of the land of Salem, that was known in those times like Urshalem, which is a city of peace. And that finally this ministry of Melchizedek brings us a denotation of a minister separated from Abram, and who also represents or symbolizes the ministry that the Eternal gives to the nations outside the covenant with Abram and his descendants. In addition to the fact that Melchizedek blesses Abram in the name of the Most High Elyon, the Most High Elohim, and in this it is confirmed that everything that Abram was doing was by the will of the Creator for good for Abram. And well, this is all for today's video. Thank you very much for your time. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you have any comments, you can put them down in the comment section down below. Thank you very much once again.